Chapter 16: A Dangerous Introduction. Ludwig's steps were hesitant, plagued with doubt as he moved toward the academy. Several times, he considered turning back and abandoning this strange mission. The thought of simply escaping flickered in his mind like a candle, tempting him to run far away from Van Dijk and the dark, looming threat of the Black Tower Academy. But every time he entertained the idea, a system notification would appear before him, cold and unrelenting. You will be punished by death if you abandon the current quest. I know, Ludwig muttered, his frustration bubbling over as he swatted at the ethereal window. But, of course, there was no response. There never was. The system wasn't something he could argue with or convince otherwise. It simply was. As he passed by the houses and smaller buildings scattered around the tower's perimeter, he couldn't help but marvel at the architecture. Blackened stone, ominous spires, and ancient runes seemed to breathe an eerie life into the surroundings. He stole a final glance at Van Dijk's tower as he walked, still finding it strange how empty the interior felt, given the vastness of its exterior. The space he had explored felt far too small for a structure that large. What a strange place, Ludwig muttered to himself as he continued toward the academy. Little did he know, the tower wasn't as empty as it had seemed. Hidden chambers, secret experiments, and countless mags dwelled within, conducting rituals, studying forbidden arts, and pushing the boundaries of magical knowledge in ways that Ludwig had yet to understand. The academy came into view in the distance, growing larger and grander with each step he took. The closer he got, the more the sheer magnitude of the place struck him. It was far beyond anything he had ever seen. Even as someone who had lived in opulent palaces, this academy dwarfed them all. God damn, this thing is huge, Ludwig said aloud, craning his neck to take in the towering spires and massive walls. The stone was as dark as night, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. It stood in stark contrast to the sunlit sky, casting an almost sinister shadow over the surrounding landscape. The walls that surrounded the academy were colossal, towering at least 20 meters high, and the buildings behind them reached even further into the sky, their peaks barely visible from the ground. The gate was formidable, a massive steel barrier that seemed more suited to a fortress than a place of learning. Standing before it, draped in black robes with a cowl obscuring his face, was a man, clearly a gatekeeper of sorts. His presence was both mysterious and foreboding, fitting perfectly into the dark aura of the academy. Ludwig felt the man's eyes on him, though he couldn't see them. Ludwig considered using inspect on the robed figure but thought better of it. He remembered Van Dijk's warning. They'll feel it. The gatekeeper's voice was low, almost a growl. You there? He gestured toward Ludwig. What are you doing outside the academy? Ludwig blinked, realizing for the first time that he was already wearing the academy's robes. I'm here by recommendation, Ludwig replied, fishing the letter out of his pocket and handing it over. The gatekeeper didn't even bother to open the letter. He simply held it in his palm for a moment before it ignited, burning to ash in seconds. Ludwig's eyes widened in shock. What the hell are you doing? He exclaimed. That was his only recommendation letter. Was he going to have to go all the way back to Van Dijk for another one? The man let out a grunt, clearly unimpressed by Ludwig's outburst. The letter seems legit, he muttered. Get in. Without another word, the steel gates creaked open, granting Ludwig entrance. Confused but relieved, Ludwig walked through the open gates, shaking his head. What the hell was that about? He muttered under his breath. This place was already strange, and he had barely set foot inside. Just as Ludwig crossed the threshold, the sound of a body being flung through the air caught his attention. He looked up just in time to see a young man, barely his age, come crashing to the ground in front of him. The student's clothes were singed with fire, smoke rising from his burnt robes, and his eyes had rolled back into his skull. He was unconscious, utterly defeated. Two more students approached the unconscious boy, their faces twisted into smug, bullying grins. They looked down on the fallen student with disdain, as though his mere existence was an inconvenience to them. What are you looking at? One of the bullies sneered at Ludwig, his voice dripping with contempt. Ludwig chose not to respond, his mind racing. Bullies. The academy was filled with them, just like in all the stories he had read. He kept his gaze forward and walked past them, unwilling to get involved in a fight he had no hope of winning. Thought as much, the leader of the two bullies snorted, watching Ludwig retreat. This place is full of spineless commoners. Ludwig's eyes narrowed, but he didn't engage. What was the point? He was at level 1, barely able to defend himself. Fighting now would only ensure his death, or worse, his exposure. As Ludwig made his way deeper into the academy grounds, he realized that chaos was the norm here. All around him, explosions of fire, lightning, and wind tore through the air as students dueled each other without a care. Destruction reigned, with debris littering the cobbled pathways. It was as though the academy existed in a state of perpetual combat, where the strong preyed upon the weak at every turn. Focus, Ludwig. He reminded himself to keep a low profile. He had no interest in these students or their petty battles. His goal was simple: get in, learn, and stay under the radar. Van Dijk had warned him: no dark magic, no necromancy, and no drawing attention. Ludwig finally reached the largest building at the center of the academy, its towering spires and dark architecture looming over him. As he approached the entrance, unsure of where to go, a raven landed on his shoulder with a call. "The headmaster wishes to speak with you," the raven croaked, its beady eyes glinting in the dim light. It gave Ludwig a sharp peck, urging him forward. The bird guided Ludwig through winding corridors and staircases until they arrived at the top floor of the building. In front of him stood a large, locked wooden door. The raven cawed once more and flew away, leaving Ludwig standing alone. With a hesitant hand, Ludwig reached for the door, only for it to creak open on its own, revealing a darkened office. Behind a massive desk stacked high with papers, an old man in black robes sat, his face obscured by the towering stacks of parchment. Despite the clutter, the man's eyes, piercing and cold, stared at Ludwig for but a second, then back at the papers as he continued speaking. His voice was calm, yet the words he spoke were lethal. "So," he began, his tone laced with quiet authority, "as an academy that prides itself in working against the dark arts and teaches defenses against dark magic, I must ask, what is a skeleton doing in my domain?" Ludwig froze. "Well, shit. 17 the price of undeath." Ludwig's mouth kept opening and closing, as though searching for the right words, while the headmaster continued working, quill scratching steadily across parchment. The air between them thickened, the weight of the unspoken demand pressing down on Ludwig's chest. He could feel the headmaster's expectation, waiting for his answer, but his mind raced, stumbling over itself. There was no right answer, and Ludwig knew it. Deep down, his body trembled with the certainty that no matter what he said, the headmaster would see through him. Ludwig couldn't lie. Not to someone of this power. Van Dijk had warned him. A mere glance from anyone above the 6th rank would shatter his disguise. And this headmaster, he was leagues beyond that. The very room hummed with his presence, an invisible power that seemed to coil around Ludwig, tightening with each passing second. It was a terrifying reminder that any attempt at deception would only get him killed. His body felt frozen, bound by fear. But against his will, Ludwig's mouth moved. "Necros' blessing has been activated. I have not willingly sought to be what I am." Ludwig's voice came out, the words foreign and hollow, as though Necros himself had guided his tongue. "But I wish to reverse it. And what other place than the Dark Academy is there to study the dark arts?" The quill stopped. The headmaster raised an eyebrow, his fingers still on the parchment as he slowly turned his gaze toward Ludwig, locking eyes with him. "Dark Academy?" he echoed, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's been a long time since I've heard that term. This is the Black Tower Academy, young one." Ludwig's gut twisted in embarrassment at the mistake, though not of his own but Necros' words, but there was no time to dwell on it before the headmaster continued. "You say you wish to reverse the curse of undeath." His voice was soft, almost amused. "But do you truly understand what that means?" Ludwig remained silent, knowing better than to speak too quickly. "It means," the headmaster continued, "to defy the god of death. Necros does not take kindly to those who would dare reclaim what he has rightfully taken. Returning to life is not a matter of will. It is an affront to the natural order. His gaze sharpened, boring into Ludwig. Do you understand the cost of angering a god? Ludwig's throat felt dry, but the words still slipped out, compelled by a mixture of fear and resignation. It isn't about will. It's about necessity. I never wanted this. This curse was forced upon me. The headmaster leaned back, considering Ludwig's words carefully. So it was for many before you, he said, his tone turning grave. Do you think the millions of undead wandering the earth chose this fate? Do you think they wished to return as hollow shells, lost to the world of the living? He sighed, the weight of centuries in his voice. No one wants this. Ludwig's eyes hardened, resolve setting in. No one wants this, he agreed, his voice low but steady. But I refuse to accept it. I will struggle against it. If there's even a chance to reverse this, I'll take it. The headmaster's expression softened, just slightly. There was something akin to respect in his eyes, though veiled by an air of caution. He stood, his dark robes flowing as he approached Ludwig. His hand came to rest on Ludwig's shoulder, and the touch felt heavy, almost suffocating. You're weak, the headmaster said bluntly, fragile, brittle. You don't have the strength to undertake something as monumental as reversing undeath. If it's even possible, you have a long way to go. I know that, Ludwig replied. His voice was firmer now, a small flicker of determination in the face of the overwhelming odds. But what else am I supposed to do? An undead has time, and I'd rather spend mine fighting than idling away the centuries. The headmaster's lips twitched into a faint smile. That's the spirit. He gave Ludwig's shoulder a final pat before stepping back. I wanted to see where your end goal lies, and so far, you've spoken no lies. But make no mistake, you're still very much a novice here. With a wave of his hand, the headmaster summoned a small black raven from the shadows. The bird materialized out of thin air, its eyes glowing faintly as it fluttered to perch on Ludwig's shoulder. This is Bulgasol, the headmaster said, my assistant. He will take you to your classes. You have much to learn. The raven blinked, and in a voice that was unnervingly sharp, it cawed, follow me. I will lead the way. The headmaster raised his hand, and in it, he held a crystal, a communicator, much like the one Van Dijk had used before. The swirling mist within the crystal began to form an image, slowly solidifying into the shape of a figure. Van Dijk stood atop a pile of corpses, blooded, fur-covered corpses. They looked like humanoid wolves. Werewolves? Van Dijk, the headmaster spoke, his voice laced with irritation. Stop slaughtering lycanthropes. At this rate, you'll exterminate the entire race. Van Dijk, whose face had been twisted into a grim mask of hatred, suddenly noticed the call and his expression shifted. The anger melted away in an instant, replaced by his usual playful, almost maddeningly smug smile. Headmaster Tilda, he purred. Did you miss me? Enough of your games, the headmaster snapped. You knew I would figure out that your pupil is undead. What are you planning, Van Dijk? Van Dijk's grin widened, his eyes gleaming with mischief. An experiment, of course. The headmaster let out a long, frustrated sigh. So, have you found him yet? Van Dijk's expression flickered, momentarily darkening. No, he admitted, his voice low with barely contained rage. He kicked at one of the corpses and it caused the entire thing to shatter into an explosion of blood and sinew. The lead was wrong. These were just third-rate lycanthropes. Nothing useful. The headmaster didn't respond immediately, his eyes shifting briefly to Ludwig. What do you intend to do with Ludwig? He asked, his tone almost casual. Van Dijk's gaze snapped back to Ludwig, and his smile returned, though this time it felt sharper, more dangerous. Oh, don't bully him too much, headmaster. He's mine, after all. The headmaster chuckled softly. I have no interest in taking what belongs to you, but I won't agree to our original deal. He will not be returning to your tower every night. Van Dijk's smile faltered. What? Why not? If he stays with his peers for too long. He'll be fine, the headmaster interrupted. You can see it for yourself. He's not like the others. He has a level of control, of intellect. If he's discovered, we'll deal with it then. Van Dijk's expression darkened for a split second before he regained his composure. Fine, but I still need to check on his progress. Once a month. Agreed, the headmaster said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Once a month. Now, Ludwig, he added, turning his attention back to him, Bulgasol will guide you to your first class. Follow its instructions. And remember, this academy is not kind to the weak. Ludwig nodded. After all, at the first step he took in this academy, he saw a student on the brink of death. Ludwig felt the raven's sharp talons grip his shoulder more tightly. This way, it croaked, giving Ludwig a sharp peck to get him moving. The door to the headmaster's office closed behind him with a soft click, but Ludwig couldn't shake the lingering sensation that he had barely survived an encounter far more dangerous than it seemed. Hurry! Bulgasol called, its voice as harsh as a whip. Class has already started. Call! Ludwig quickened his pace, the hallways of the Black Tower Academy looming dark and vast around him. His first class was magic theory, and judging by Bulgasol's impatience, he was already 2 hours late. They passed a wall where Bulgasol suddenly stopped, pointing a sharp beak at a list posted there. Your schedule. Memorize it, the bird demanded. Ludwig took a quick glance. His weekly schedule was filled with intimidating subjects: magic theory, dark art history, black magic reversal, alchemy and magic craftsmanship, and practical training. Each class lasted 4 hours a day, once a day, and today, he had already missed half of magic theory. He memorized the schedule in a single glance, thanks to the blessing of undeath and the sharpness of his mind, both enhanced by the cold, still clarity that came with his new form. Bulgasol fluttered impatiently, pecking him again as it led him to a large wooden door. Peck, peck. An old man opened the door, his hunched form almost bending under the weight of his years. He squinted at Ludwig, and then at Bulgasol. New student? Headmaster recommendation. Bulgasol cawed in response. Late, it added with a sharp tone. You didn't need to remind him of that. Ludwig thought inwardly. The old man sighed, shaking his head. You really are unlucky. Exams are next week. How will you manage? Ludwig's stomach sank. Exams? A week from now? The old man gestured for him to enter. No time to dwell on it now. Get in and take a seat. And good luck. As Ludwig stepped into the massive lecture hall, the eyes of hundreds of students turned toward him. Some stared with disinterest, while others, mostly the girls, whistled softly, their gazes lingering on his sharp. After all, Ludwig didn't seem to realize that his former appearance as a human was what one would consider dashing and handsome. And the current slime disguise he has on perfectly replicated his appearance before he died. Additionally, wearing the black dress of the Black Tower Academy gave him a villainous and devilish handsomeness that seemed to be the trope with females nowadays. Quite please, the teacher said. And immediately the entire class went to silence. This earned Ludwig's respect. After all, he underestimated the old man from his appearance, but the way he handled hundreds of students was nothing but perfect, using 2 words. Go pick a seat, the old man said and returned to the board. He kept his head down, moving quickly to find a seat. Sorry. He mumbled as he squeezed into an empty spot between 2 students. To his right was a girl who seemed far from interested in anything regarding makeup or looking good at all, and had more notes on her book than the words on it. And to his other side was a young man who seemed more interested in dozing off than paying attention to the class. Ludwig pulled out a small booklet, flipping it open to take notes, but as he glanced at the board, a sharp pain shot through the back of his head. The symbols scrawled across the board were incomprehensible, a mess of foreign glyphs and ancient runes that sent a splitting headache through his skull. What kind of place was this? He wasn't even sure if he'd survive the week, let alone the exams. Ludwig's head felt as if it were about to split, not from pain, but from the sheer overload of information sprawled across the board in incomprehensible symbols and formulas. The sheer volume of content was staggering, and his mind struggled to make sense of any of it. He pulled out his notebook, pen ready, hoping to at least jot something down. But the moment he prepared to write, the teacher nonchalantly began wiping the board clean. Ludwig's mouth dropped open. "What the hell, man?" He groaned under his breath. "Shush!" the student sitting next to him hissed, her voice sharp but whispery. Ludwig turned to glance at her. She was disheveled, her hair a chaotic mess, and the bags under her eyes suggested a severe lack of sleep. Despite her exhausted appearance, her eyes were bright, sharp, and focused, scanning the material as though her life depended on it. "Quiet," she muttered. "If I lose focus now, I'll never catch up." Ludwig could only sigh in resignation. His hopes for the semester dwindled by the second, and after this rocky start, he couldn't imagine how he would survive, let alone succeed. He was late, confused, and, frankly, way out of his depth. The class dragged on, and when it finally ended, he realized he had even more questions than when he first walked in. Just as he packed his notebook, a group of students approached his desk. Ludwig was caught off guard by the attention. "Say, Ludwig," one of the students said. She was a striking blonde, her posture regal, and a delicate insignia embroidered on her uniform hinted at noble status. "Nobility," Ludwig mused internally. "What family are you from?" she asked, her voice dripping with polite curiosity. Ludwig hesitated. I come from a distant family," he replied, choosing his words carefully. He was painfully aware of how his background on Earth meant nothing here. Her brow furrowed slightly, her smile growing a touch more strained. "Nobility, I presume." Though his parents had wealth and influence in the human world, Ludwig's family had no ties to nobility. Feudal systems had long been abolished on Earth. He shook his head slightly, unsure of how to frame his answer. "No, not nobility. I wouldn't say that," he admitted, thinking that merchants would be the closest equivalent to his family's status. Instantly, he felt the shift in the air. A few students exchanged glances, the spark of interest in their eyes dimming. One girl muttered under her breath, "A commoner. What a waste of good looks," before turning on her heel and walking away. The rest followed suit, their enthusiasm fading as quickly as it had appeared. Most of the students dispersed, their curiosity gone. Only a few remained, their gazes a mix of mild interest and amusement. "I suppose you've received a recommendation from the tower." Then, a male student said, his tone more respectful. "You must possess some remarkable magical talent, no?" Ludwig shook his head again, this time more firmly. "Not really," he said honestly. Another wave of disinterest swept through the remaining students. They lost whatever intrigue they had left and walked away. Soon, Ludwig was left with only one companion, the girl who had been sitting next to him during class. "You're an idiot," she said flatly. Ludwig blinked in confusion. "What? Why?" She sighed, clearly exasperated. "Why did you tell them the truth? If you had stayed mysterious, dodged their questions, or just given vague answers, you wouldn't have made yourself a target." "A target? I don't understand." Ludwig began, only to stop as she waved him off. "You just told them you don't come from a powerful background. You have no one to protect you. And you were recommended by the tower without having any real magical abilities. You think they're going to leave you alone? No, you've just marked yourself as the perfect candidate for ridicule." Ludwig frowned. "But how does this lead to bullying?" The girl gave him a withering look before tossing a notebook onto his desk. "These are my notes for the entire semester. It's your only hope of passing the exams." Ludwig looked at her in surprise. "Why are you giving this to me?" "I've already memorized everything," she said, walking away. "You'll need it more than I do." Ludwig flipped through the pages, noticing the meticulous notes, small sticky tabs, and countless scribbles that filled every available space. The amount of effort she had put into this was staggering. He glanced back at her as she moved toward the door, only to notice a group of students watching her, watching both of them, with cold, calculating eyes. "Keep your head down," she warned over her shoulder. "Otherwise, you'll end up in serious trouble." One of the other girls standing near the exit stuck her leg out as if to trip her, but the girl simply stepped over it, clearly used to such petty tricks. A snort came from the group as the failed attempt drew their scorn. Ludwig let out a long breath. "So, this whole school runs on hierarchy," he muttered to himself. "Just like all those stories." Inwardly, he shook his head. How absurd. He hadn't expected students in this magical world to act so superficial. But it was a lesson learned, and Ludwig knew that. He had made a mistake, but at least it had come early. If he was going to survive in this place, he needed to keep his head down and not make himself a target. Better to learn from these small blunders now, while the stakes were low. Ludwig tucked the notes into his ring, standing up from his seat as he prepared to leave. As he walked toward the exit, a notification suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. "You're entering a hostile environment." One of the students standing by the door opened his mouth as if to say something, but before any words could leave his lips, a loud sound pierced the room. "Kaw." The students froze, and Ludwig looked up to see Bulgasol perched on his shoulder, cawing loudly. The raven flapped its wings menacingly, and the tension in the air dissolved immediately. The group of students backed away, clicking their tongues in frustration, realizing that they couldn't make a move while the headmaster's pet was there. Without another word, they dispersed, leaving Ludwig alone with Bulgasol. "Bulgasol," Ludwig muttered, "thanks for showing up. Things might have gotten ugly." "You're the ugly one." "Caw." Bulgasol screeched. "I didn't mean you," Ludwig sighed, rubbing his temples. "Follow me. To your dorm room." "Caw," the bird ordered, pecking at Ludwig's shoulder to prod him forward. The crow led Ludwig through the winding halls of the academy, pecking incessantly whenever he slowed down. After what felt like an eternity of enduring the constant jabs, they arrived at a quieter part of the campus, the dormitory area. Bulgasol led him to an empty room with a single bed. "The headmaster has granted you a private room. Keep a low profile, avoid mingling with others, and study well." "Caw," the raven commanded before flying off through the window. Ludwig glanced around the room. It was simple but comfortable, with a single bed, a desk large enough for study, and a small bookshelf that contained a few familiar titles. Some of the books were straight from Bostos van Dijk's personal collection. He recognized them immediately. He sat down on the bed, deep in thought. There was so much to consider, so much to plan. He needed a clear goal. 2 major quests loomed before him. First, there was Necro's eternal quest, with its primary objective, to outgrow Bostos van Dijk's control. It felt like the beginning of a long, impossible journey, an overarching mission that could span years, if not decades. It was like one of those sprawling main quests in the MMORPGs Ludwig used to play, where each step led to more challenges, more mysteries, and more danger. But that quest wasn't achievable in the near future. It was something far off, something to work toward. His second quest, however, was more immediate, to graduate from the academy. 3 years of study stood between him and the chance to advance from a grunt skeleton to a skeleton mage. Ludwig smiled faintly. It was a long road ahead, but at least now he had a clearer sense of direction. With Bulgasol's words still echoing in his mind, he resolved to keep his head down and focus on his studies. For now, that was all he could do. Chapter 19 Baby Steps. Ludwig sighed, leaning back against the simple chair in his dorm room. His mind swirled with thoughts about the quests he had been given, each of them feeling impossibly distant and difficult to achieve. None were straightforward, and certainly none were fast to complete. He needed to grow stronger, gather experience, and most importantly, he needed EXP to level up. Without leveling up, he'd remain stuck, too weak to achieve anything significant. Higher levels meant more stats meant stronger abilities, and with that, survival. It was the same principle in every MMORPG he had ever played. But in this world, it wasn't as simple as running into a forest and killing low-level monsters for experience. There were no monsters in sight. At least, not until Ludwig peered out his window. In the courtyard below, something unexpected caught his eye. Hundreds of students filled the open training area, but instead of performing magical incantations or working with arcane artifacts, they were wielding swords. They stood in rows, their blades glinting in the setting sun as they followed the commands of an instructor. Each swing of their swords was executed with precision, the sound of metal cutting through the air in unison. Ludwig furrowed his brow in confusion. Wasn't this an academy for magic? Why were they training with swords? He couldn't help but be intrigued. Something stirred deep inside him, a primal urge, one he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't connected to necros or any divine influence. It was something personal, something that had always been there. Every boy grows up dreaming of wielding a sword, of fighting against impossible odds. Ludwig had once dreamed of the same thing. Without really thinking, he reached for a stick that had been left leaning against the corner of his room. He gripped it, watching the students below as they performed their drills. Slowly, he imitated their movements. Swinging the stick downward in slow, deliberate motions, he tried to follow the same pattern they used, feeling the weight of the action as though it were a real sword. He swung again, and again. Each time, he felt his focus narrowing, his body following the rhythm of the movement. Then, without warning, something appeared in his vision. Necro's blessing has activated. You have learned Trace. Trace, an ability that allows you to follow and mimic certain motions to increase your learning potential. Trace is currently at the novice level. You can only trace basic movements. Ludwig blinked in surprise as the faint outline of a blue line appeared in the air before him, stretching from above his head and down toward the floor. It was like an afterimage of the perfect sword swing, a guiding path for his movements. He immediately understood what he needed to do. With renewed determination, Ludwig swung his makeshift sword, this time making sure to follow the ethereal line exactly. Ding! Congratulations! You have learned basic swordsmanship. An update appeared in his quest log, followed by another notification. Update to Black Tower Academy's quest. Additional reward for completing 3 years of study in the academy. Job change, skeleton swordsman. Ludwig paused, his hands gripping the stick tightly. He reread the notification, thinking it over. So, he murmured to himself, if I follow the mage path, I'll become a skeleton mage. But if I focus on swordsmanship, I'll get a melee class instead. Which one's better? He didn't have an immediate answer. The world of magic was still new to him, and while he'd always been drawn to the idea of wielding spells, something about the physicality of swordsmanship resonated with him. But was it practical? He had no idea how the balance between magic and melee worked in this world. Unable to decide, Ludwig shrugged. Why not both? For now, he would train his body and mind in tandem. There was no need to choose just yet. He continued swinging his stick, following the guiding blue line of his new skill. Each swing brought another notification. Good swing. Decent swing. Miss. Ludwig quickly realized that the notifications were tied to how well he followed the trace ability. If his swing was too fast or too slow, it would result in a miss. If he didn't quite follow the line, it would be labeled decent. But when he struck the balance, following the line perfectly at the right speed, he earned a good swing. The system was precise, and Ludwig found it strangely satisfying to try and master the pattern. There's got to be a higher stage, Ludwig muttered to himself. He trusted in his judgment and kept practicing, determined to find that next level of mastery. Hours passed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the training area outside grew quiet, the students gradually dispersing as their session ended. But Ludwig didn't stop. Long after the last of the students had left, he remained in his room, swinging his stick in the darkness, determined to improve. Finally, after what felt like countless repetitions, a new notification appeared in front of him. +1 strength. +1 stamina. Since you're an undead class, all stamina bonus points are converted into strength. Ludwig grinned, feeling a rush of satisfaction. Despite his initial status as a level 1 skeleton, he was making real progress. His body, or rather, his bones, were becoming stronger through sheer persistence. By the time he finally stopped, Ludwig had gained a total of 5 strength points, with 5 more bonus points from the stamina conversions. He wiped the sweat from his brow out of habit, even though his body didn't produce any. Old instincts were hard to shake. He pulled up his status screen to review his progress. Status screen: Ludwig Heart. Race: skeleton. Level: 1. Health: 100/100. Stamina: infinite. Mana: 100/100. Intelligence: 23. Strength: 22. Dexterity: 10. Vigor: 10. Luck: 15. Class: skeleton grunt. Title: Skills: Trace, Basic Undead Summon Sigil. Passives: Basic Swordsmanship, Undead Resolve. Overt Genius, increased proficiency in all sorts of masteries. Ludwig studied the screen, recognizing where he stood in the grand scheme of things. He was still weak by most standards, but he was growing, little by little. The fact that he could gain stats through training, even as a skeleton, was something he hadn't expected. It was a strange realization, but one he welcomed. His gaze drifted to the book notes he had been given earlier in class. Since he didn't need to sleep, he figured there was no harm in reading. Might as well start studying, he muttered. How bad could it be? Ludwig flipped open the notes, his eyes scanning the intricate diagrams and explanations scribbled throughout the pages. At first glance, it seemed overwhelming, but he was determined to make sense of it. After all, if he wanted to keep up in this world, he'd need to excel both physically and mentally. And with that, he began his night-long study session, his mind sharp and alert. This was just the beginning. Chapter 20: Spells and Skills. If skeletons could show fatigue, Ludwig would have had deep bags under his eyes. But, thanks to the slime skin he wore over his skeletal frame, nothing showed on his face, even though his mind felt like it was about to burst. He had read through all the notes his classmate had given him, leaving no page untouched. For anyone else, the task would have required immense focus and countless hours of concentration. But Ludwig wasn't anyone else. His undead stamina, paired with his innate genius for absorbing knowledge, allowed him to read and comprehend everything in a single night without needing to rest. However, the experience wasn't as smooth as he'd hoped. The notes were chaotically organized, jumping randomly from subject to subject. One page would discuss magic theory, only to leap suddenly into alchemy, then back to dark art history, and finally, curses, all with no logical flow. Still, Ludwig's sharp mind was able to piece together a pattern, however erratic it was. This girl has extreme ADHD, Ludwig muttered under his breath as he finally closed the notebook. Despite the disorganization, he had gained valuable insights, even if they had come at the cost of a nearly shattered mind. He glanced out the window. It's morning already. The pale sunlight trickled into his room, signaling the start of a new day. He checked the nearby clock. Class was about to begin. Today's lesson was in Black Magic Reversal, a course that taught students not how to use dark magic, but how to dispel or neutralize it. The academy no longer taught the black arts, but it did provide its students with the tools to counteract and survive against them, a necessity in this world where dark magic still lurked. Ludwig stood, tucking the notebook into his ring, and exited the room. He walked through the dim corridors of the academy, half expecting Bulgasol to swoop down and accompany him, but the raven was nowhere in sight. I guess he's back with the headmaster, Ludwig muttered, continuing on his way. He was aware of the mistake he had made the previous day. Exposing himself to his peers as a commoner had been a tactical error, one he wouldn't repeat. The academy was a shark tank, and nobles liked to toy with those they considered weak. Without a powerful family to back him, Ludwig was already a target. And right on cue, as soon as he stepped out of the dormitory, 3 young men appeared, blocking his path. Ludwig recognized 2 of them. They were the same students who had tormented another unfortunate commoner the moment Ludwig arrived at the academy. Well, sneered the leader of the group, his blonde hair shimmering in the sunlight. His voice dripped with arrogance. Another commoner. You lot really are endless, aren't you? His oversized companion grunted in agreement, while the skinnier one to his right smirked with poorly veiled contempt. All three of them wore robes of finer quality than Ludwig's, and the insignias on their uniforms marked them as nobility. Nobles. Ludwig thought to himself, bracing for the inevitable confrontation. Do you have business with me? Ludwig asked, his voice calm. I don't like the tone of your voice, commoner. The blonde noble spat, his eyes narrowing. He stepped forward, reaching out as if to grab Ludwig by the neck. When I speak, you're about to enter combat. Without thinking, Ludwig muttered the word, exhaust. A sickly, slithering aura spread from Ludwig's form, washing over the three nobles like a wave of nausea. The leader collapsed to his knees, gasping as his stamina drained away in an instant. His companions weren't spared either. Both stumbled, their faces turning pale as they struggled to remain upright. The notification that appeared before Ludwig surprised him. You have applied the skill, Exhaust, with decent proficiency. You have learned the spell, Exhaust. You have used one of your spell slots. Remaining spell slots, 2. Exhaust, immediately drain a portion of your opponent's stamina. The percentage of exhaustion increases with proficiency and the element of surprise. Ludwig looked down at the three young men, who were now writhing on the ground, struggling to catch their breath. Their faces were twisted in pain, their energy completely sapped. Ludwig didn't waste a moment. He turned on his heel and made a quick escape, heading toward the study hall, his mind buzzing with thoughts. That spell from the notes. I didn't expect it to work like this. Quite powerful. The incident confirmed a suspicion he had developed while studying the notes. Last night's study session had been grueling, and he hadn't been sure whether the information would be useful. But now, after applying what he'd learned, Ludwig realized just how valuable the notebook was. This academy really was an incredible place for learning, both in magic and combat. And all it had taken was one night of study for Ludwig to cast his first spell. But as he pondered the notifications, a distinction dawned on him. He had learned a spell, not a skill. There was a key difference between the two. Skills were things one could learn by practice, through physical repetition or from a skill book. Once learned, a skill became ingrained in both the mind and soul, requiring no further thought. It was a passive ability that could be activated with ease. Spells, however, were true magic. Spells had to be understood, learned, and deliberately applied. They required focus, knowledge, and an understanding of the inner workings of mana. It wasn't enough to just go through the motions. You had to comprehend the process from start to finish. For example, the skill, Fireball, learned from a grimoire was simple. You touched the book, absorbed the knowledge, and the skill was yours. It would cost you, say, 20 mana to cast a basic fireball. Simple, effective, but not very powerful. On the other hand, casting the spell, Fireball, involved understanding the origin of mana, shaping it into flame, creating combustion, and releasing it. It required calculation and focus, but the result was far more powerful. The spell might only cost 10 mana, and the fireball it produced would be twice as destructive as the one from a skill. That was why true mags were respected and feared in this world. And that was why Ludwig had never been able to replicate Van Dijk's black flames. He had seen the black flames in action, but he hadn't understood the process behind them. Skill books are created by mags who learned the spell by heart to an incredible degree, and were able to summarize the extent of their knowledge and condense it into an instantaneous page that can be learned by touch. Basically, this means anyone with deep enough pockets can learn every spell in the world. But the reason no one is doing that is pretty simple. Lack of wisdom, mana, stamina, or even health at points. Each skill would require a different cost. For the mags, without sufficient mana one cannot simply just spam cast skills, and some would require an incredible amount of mana that normal people cannot use them. And the purpose of skills is simple, to supplement instead of being the main ability. As Ludwig hurried down the hall toward his next class, his mind raced with new realizations. He had finally begun to grasp the difference between magic circles, spells, and skills. The notebook, scattered as it was, had given him just enough knowledge to start piecing together the foundation of magic. It was an exhilarating thought. One night of study had brought him this far. What else could he learn if he dedicated more time to his studies? How much more powerful could he become? But for now, his focus needed to shift to his next class, Black Magic Reversal. He pushed open the doors to the classroom, his mind already buzzing with anticipation. He was just beginning to understand this world, and the more he learned, the more he realized there was no limit to what he could achieve. This was only the beginning. Chapter 21 Pop Quiz. Once Ludwig walked into the study hall, he scanned it and, sure enough, found the girl who had given him the notebook the day before. His presence momentarily drew the attention of the people in the room, but they quickly dismissed him, their gazes sliding away as if he were invisible. After all, Ludwig was nothing more than a commoner, devoid of the privileges or titles that made someone stand out in this place. His above-average looks were the only feature that could be considered remotely redeeming, but in a world ruled by power and prestige, appearances meant little. Fixing his eyes on the girl, Ludwig walked toward her with purpose. "Thank you for the help," he said as he handed her the notebook. She looked up from her desk, her expression flat, but a frown soon followed. Her gaze flicked over him, up and down, as though she were reassessing him, unimpressed. "Why are you returning it so soon? Did you already give up on taking the exams?" she asked, her voice carrying an edge of sarcasm. "Might be for the better if so," she added dismissively. "No," Ludwig replied, shaking his head, refusing to be rattled by her tone. "I already memorized the content. It's pretty detailed, but I managed." The girl's expression shifted to one of sheer incredulity. Her lips twisted into a mocking grin, an almost predatory look crossing her face. "At least if you want to lie, do it properly," she said with a sneer. "It's insanity to think you could even understand a fraction of this notebook in one night, not to mention fully memorize it. If you didn't appreciate the help, just say so. You don't need to lie to me." Ludwig hesitated for a moment, opening his mouth to protest, but then closed it, realizing there was no point. For anyone else, it would have been an impossible task. The notebook was chaotic, jumping from topic to topic every few pages, full of intricate details that would baffle even the brightest students. But Ludwig had managed. That was the truth, though it seemed a truth no one would believe. Sighing in resignation, he tried a different approach. "At least tell me your name," he said, hoping to shift the conversation. "I need to thank the person who helped me." "It's Cassandra," she said curtly, waving her hand as though to shoo him away, already distracted by the entrance of a new figure into the room. Ludwig turned as well, his attention caught by the imposing man now standing at the front of the study hall. The teacher who had just entered was unlike anyone Ludwig had seen before. His skin was a deep, dark brown, his tall frame clothed in the formal patterns of the Dark Academy's uniform. What caught Ludwig's attention immediately, however, were the man's long, pointed ears. A dark elf, Ludwig realized, his curiosity piqued. The man exuded authority, his presence commanding instant silence from the room. His braided hair was impeccable, and his beard was so finely groomed that Ludwig couldn't help but admire it for a moment. The man's suit was adorned with intricate designs, clearly marking him as someone of importance within the academy. Though Ludwig's instincts urged him to inspect, on the man, he hesitated. He wasn't entirely sure how the ability worked on teachers. After all, it hadn't worked on Bostos van Dijk earlier. But before he could second-guess himself, something unexpected happened. Necros's blessing is activating. Ludwig's heart raced. Why? Why was the blessing that robs his will activating now, of all times? Panic gripped him as his eyes briefly glowed, the familiar sensation of the spell seizing control of his senses. He hadn't even spoken the words to trigger it, yet the power surged through him, unstoppable. Inspect. Information window, Odoru Vast Ion. Level, 125. Alignment, Dark Magic Academy. Hidden, you do not qualify to see this yet. Health, 1,200,000. Mana, 6,000. Class, Advanced Mage, 5th tier. Secondary class, hidden, you do not qualify to see this yet. Title, Shadow Weaver, hidden, you do not qualify to see this yet. Law, a mage who seeks to advance the status of his noble house Vast Ion. He came to the Dark Academy to recover lost knowledge that his tribe once held. Though he holds the title of noble due to his rank as a 5th-tier mage, many nobles of the capital resist recognizing a dark elf among their ranks. Addendum, those of extreme ambition often lose sight of their path as they seek their goals, taking shortcuts and disregarding the steps they tread upon. Before Ludwig could process any further, the man's voice rang out, sharp and furious. Who was that? Odoru Vastian's shout reverberated through the study hall. Who dared use that vile magic in this class? Ludwig's stomach dropped. He could feel the magic stirring within him still, the remnants of Necros' blessing buzzing in his veins. The teacher hadn't spotted him, but he knew someone had used magic in his presence, and he was livid. Vastian's braids seemed to flare with an eerie energy, his eyes scanning the room for the culprit. No one dared to move, let alone confess. Silence hung heavy in the air, the tension almost unbearable. Then, in a swift movement, Vast Ion raised his arm. Fine, he barked, his voice as sharp as a blade. If you want to play games, let's play. Pop quiz time. With a flick of his wrist, papers flew off his desk and scattered themselves in front of each student. The sudden change caught everyone off guard, their groans of protest stifled by the severity of the teacher's glare. Your answers will be timed, Vast Ion continued, his tone cold and uncompromising. And if anyone is caught cheating, I will personally kick you out of this academy. Your performance on this quiz will count for 50% of your final grade. A collective sigh rippled through the room, students looking at one another in disbelief. This was completely unexpected. As Ludwig glanced at the paper that had landed before him, he felt Cassandra's gaze boring into the side of his head. He looked up to meet her eyes, and her expression was clear, you're screwed. But as Ludwig lowered his eyes to the questions, something odd happened. The answers began to form in his mind almost instantly. The knowledge from the notebook was already there, imprinted with perfect clarity, and he began writing without hesitation. His movements caught the attention of Odoru Vast Ion, whose eyes snapped toward him. The teacher strode across the room, his steps heavy with authority. He stopped in front of Ludwig's desk, looming over him. Without a word, Vast Ion slammed his hand down onto Ludwig's paper. Who are you? He demanded, his voice low and threatening. Ludwig met his gaze without flinching. New student, he answered calmly. I applied yesterday. Vastian's eyes flicked over the paper, noticing the half-written answers. His expression darkened. Why are you applying so late in the semester? Do you think you'll receive special treatment? I never expected that, Ludwig replied evenly. Vastian's gaze bore into him. Then why bother? He growled. You think you can answer questions from a class you've never attended? I had time to prepare, Ludwig said simply. Prepared? Vastian's voice dripped with contempt. How? You barely started yesterday. I read through some notes, Ludwig replied, and I think some of these questions are pretty straightforward. A faint, disbelieving laugh echoed from the room. Ludwig didn't have to look to know it was Cassandra facepalming. Her exasperation was almost palpable. Vast Ion, on the other hand, looked ready to explode. His eyes bulged with anger. Fine, he roared. Fine. If you think they're simple, then answer. And I'll do you a favor. I'll grade you right here, right now. If you pass this, you won't have to take the finals for my class. The room went completely still as Vast Ion crossed his arms, waiting. Now answer, student. Chapter 22 Deception and Discipline. Ludwig didn't allow the professor's looming presence to rattle him, nor did he feel the need to engage in any further exchange. His focus shifted back to the exam, and his eyes scanned the next question on the paper. If a curse can only be broken by the one who cast it, what's the most effective way to ensure the curse is lifted if the caster has perished? The question seemed straightforward at first glance, but Ludwig knew better than to rush. His intuition told him that this was a trick question, one that required careful thought. He paused, considering the implications, before he began writing his answer. While it might appear that a curse would become unbreakable once the caster has perished, the key lies in understanding the source of a curse's power. Curses are often tied to intent and energy. If the curse was bound to an object or place, destroying or cleansing the conduit of power can sever the curse's influence. Additionally, some ancient curses are linked to the caster's bloodline or their magical legacy, meaning a descendant or magical heir could have the authority to lift it. Therefore, to break such a curse, you would need to locate either the source of its power or a living relative of the caster. Ludwig lifted his hand from the paper, noticing the professor eyeing him with a smug, skeptical expression. Odoru Vastion clearly anticipated an incomplete or inadequate answer, as though Ludwig's response so far had fallen short of his high standards. But Ludwig wasn't finished. He leaned back over the paper, his pen moving smoothly as he added, "Additionally, the most effective method is not always to break the curse, but to transfer it." That last line seemed to hit its mark. The professor's expression darkened, his scowl deepening into something far more irate. Ludwig allowed himself a small smirk, knowing he had nailed the answer. Without lingering on the professor's reaction, Ludwig moved to the next question. How does necromancy affect a soul that died peacefully? This, too, was a question designed to mislead most students, feeding into common misconceptions. Ludwig's pen hovered for a moment before he wrote. There is a widespread misunderstanding regarding necromancy and the undead. Many believe that only those who died violent or cursed deaths return as the undead, but this is not the case. Even those who died peacefully and led pious, religious lives can fall victim to necromantic forces. The truth is that once a soul is revived, it is ensnared by the malevolent essence of undeath. It is called malevolence, but what it truly represents is the soul's resentment toward the living. Those who have died, no matter how they passed, do not wish to suffer alone in death's abyss. The bitterness toward the living grows, and the undead seek to drag others into death, ensuring no one escapes the ultimate fate of all who have lived. He continued answering the rest of the questions with the same precision, each one crafted to mislead or test a student's true understanding. Ludwig explained not just the answers but the underlying principles and nuances, ensuring his reasoning was solid and his comprehension irrefutable. Every question seemed to echo knowledge Ludwig had gleaned from his time in Bostos van Dijk's library, as well as Cassandra's notes, which he had committed to memory. It was a perfect blend of theoretical knowledge and practical insight. As Ludwig finished writing his final answer, he felt the weight of Odoru Vastion's gaze upon him. The professor was seething, his frustration barely concealed. Ludwig calmly stood, walking to the front of the room to hand in his paper. "Thank you," Ludwig said politely, holding the exam out to the professor. Odorua's hand clenched the paper tightly, crumpling one edge of it in his grip. His face was a mask of barely contained fury as he stared down at Ludwig. "Who taught you all of this?" he demanded, his voice a dangerous growl. "I've read a lot of books," Ludwig replied evenly. "Leave," the professor barked, his voice echoing across the silent study hall. Without a word, Ludwig gathered his things and turned to leave. As he reached the door, Vastion's voice called out again, stopping him in his tracks. "Halt!" Ludwig turned back, meeting the professor's narrowed eyes. "You're not required to attend my exam next week," Vastion said, glaring at the paper in his hand. His teeth ground together as he added, "Perfect marks." Ludwig nodded, his expression betraying nothing, and walked out of the hall. But once he was outside, his non-existent heart felt as though it was thumping in his chest. Though he had no heart, being nothing more than a skeleton covered by a slime that acted as his skin, the sensation of anxiety still gripped him. It wasn't fear exactly, but a lingering worry, a sense of having barely escaped danger. Necros's blessing had almost exposed him, nearly giving away his identity. Fortunately, Odoru Vastion had not yet realized who had cast the spell. But Ludwig knew he had come perilously close to being caught. As Ludwig passed through the academy's corridors, he could feel the eyes of other students on him. They stared, confused and shocked, unable to comprehend how a student who had only arrived the day before had not only completed the professor's grueling test but had also earned a perfect score. The Dark Magic Academy was infamous for making exams nightmarish, and Odoru Vastion was one of its most challenging instructors. Yet Ludwig had defied all expectations. However, the stunned faces of his peers quickly returned to focus on their own problems. The remainder of the exam still awaited them, and they had little time to spare on speculation about Ludwig. With no obligations left for the day, Ludwig decided to head toward the academy's training grounds, where the students practiced swordsmanship. He didn't want to run into the same arrogant nobles from earlier that morning, so he carefully checked that the coast was clear before making his way to the open courtyard. When he arrived, the same group of students from yesterday was still there, practicing the same technique over and over again. Ludwig took a seat a little distance away from them, not wanting to disturb their session. He watched silently, observing their movements. Most of them were decent, though some were too fast or too slow in their swings. His attention was drawn to one student in particular, a tall, lanky boy positioned at the back of the group. The boy had a firm grip on his wooden sword and struck with a fluidity that stood out from the others. His swing was nearly perfect, smooth, and controlled. Ludwig's eyes lingered on the boy's form for longer than he realized. "Are you interested in swordsmanship?" The voice startled Ludwig. He turned to find a tall, muscular woman standing behind him. She wore tight shorts and a cropped shirt, exposing her chiseled abdomen. A long scar ran down the right side of her face, giving her an intimidating yet feral look, especially with the broad grin she wore, like a lion sizing up its next meal. "A little bit," Ludwig replied cautiously. She looked him up and down, her gaze assessing. "With that scrawny body of yours, I'd be shocked if you could even swing a sword properly." "You're a mage, aren't you?" she asked, her tone more curious than mocking. "I'm learning," Ludwig said simply. "Join them," she said, gesturing toward the training students. "Grab a wooden sword and show me what you've got." Ludwig hesitated. "I'm not part of the swordsmanship students." The woman shrugged. "Doesn't matter. I'm more interested in your eyes." She stepped closer, tilting his chin up slightly with her fingers. "For a skeleton, you have pretty eyes." A shiver ran down Ludwig's spine at her touch. "Don't worry," she said with a playful slap on his back that sent a jolt through his body. -1 HP. "The headmaster told me about you. Bostos is weird like that, sending a skeleton to learn magic to fight against dark arts. But hey, that's not even the strangest thing he's done this year. Go on, grab a sword, and let's see what you've got." Ludwig had a strong feeling that refusing her wasn't an option. He nodded, reluctantly making his way to the weapon rack. His mind was racing, filled with thoughts, none of them good. He grabbed the first weapon he could find. Wooden sword. Type, sword. Durability, 100/100. Damage, 4 to 7. A brittle training sword. Quite useless for killing enemies, but sufficient for teaching one how to do so. He mentally waved away the notification screen and took his place at the back of the group. Taking an unnecessary deep breath, Ludwig followed the movements of the other students and swung the wooden sword down, following the pattern of trace. The moment he did, the teacher appeared next to him, seemingly out of nowhere. Her eyes were wide with surprise. "How?" she exclaimed, her voice sharp. "How did you do that?" Ludwig didn't know how to answer other than, "I just followed that guy's move," he said almost questioningly. The teacher looked at the person Ludwig was talking about. It was the same guy he was tracing earlier with his eyes, and frankly he was the best one at it among his peers for her class. "That's quite impressive," she said. She thought for a second and said, "Do it again." Ludwig followed her orders and swung once more, this time more cleanly, making the surprise in her eyes grow bigger. "A genius," she said and grabbed Ludwig by the scruff of his clothes. "Come with me," she said, dragging him even. Ludwig was helpless against the pushy attitude of this ogre-like teacher and was pulled all the way to a room inside the building. The room had no one inside it but a few training dummies and a few wooden swords laying around. "Show me if you can replicate this," she said as she slowly demonstrated to Ludwig a slow upward swing that flowed immediately into 3 consecutive slashes after a forward step. The dummy was blasted apart by the move and made Ludwig surprised to see that slow move doing so much damage. Ludwig's eyes immediately lit up. Trace activated, and he saw the pattern the teacher took. He approached the dummy, grabbed the sword, and began following the patterns that Trace was showing him. So far, Trace could only replicate basic moves, and this one didn't seem too difficult. So he did as told, an upward starting slash, followed by 3 consecutive swings after a forceful step forward. Once he finished his moves, it was as if the time had stopped for the puppet, and immediately the puppet blasted away as if all the blows came after a delay. The teacher was stunned as she saw him execute the move perfectly. "You're a monster," she said. "Ah, wait, that was supposed to be a compliment. I'm not talking about the fact that you're a skeleton. But what the heck was that? How did you replicate the Imperial-style swordsmanship after seeing it once?" Ludwig frowned. It looked simple enough. Shouldn't anyone be able to replicate it after they see it once? He asked. No. That's the whole damn point of the Imperial swordsmanship. It may look simple, but any newbie would fall to the ground the moment he took a step forward to allow the consecutive hits to flow. That's not something that can be replicated without years of practice. "Then how about you try this?" she said and showed Ludwig the second move, a follow-up to the first stance of the Imperial-style swordsmanship. It continued on with a forward body spin that slammed the sword down and then with a forceful heave, ripped it from the ground, causing the air to flow ahead like a cone. It didn't look that impressive, but Ludwig felt that the teacher was slowing down the move purposefully for him to see it. Trace had already memorized the move for him, and so he just had to follow it to the letter. Ludwig tried to do the same, but instantly fell down, unable to spin his body forward. "I see. I guess it's too hard for you," she said. "How about you try the first stance first and try and combo it with the second stance?" she asked. Ludwig nodded and did the same. The moment he finished the first move and slashed thrice, the blue trace light turned yellow, and immediately after he tried to spin forward, it turned red and shattered, causing him to fall to the ground. The teacher said as she rubbed her chin. "You're following with your eyes before your body. This shows how weak your foundation is. You need to learn how to walk before you try and run. Though that's mainly my fault, you're supposed to be a mage," she said. "What does that have to do with anything?" Ludwig asked. "Basics. The basics are everything. Look at your hands," she said. Ludwig did but didn't understand anything. "You're holding the sword too tightly, almost afraid it would escape. You're too rigid, you're inflexible. Your feet are almost a beat slower than the rest of your body. You need to have more muscle. Wait." She facepalmed. "Yeah, fake body." Ludwig pointed at himself. "Skeletons have no muscles," he added. The teacher's eyes lit up. "I know just the guy who can help," she said and pulled a communication crystal, calling someone who Ludwig least expected. "Yo, old foggy," she said, and Bostos van Dijk appeared in the holographic image. He looked to be in the slums of some city. "Dearest Joanna, what's the reason for this rare call? Aren't we on bad terms?" he said. "Enough with that. Let bygones be bygones. I have something interesting to show you," she said as she showed him Ludwig. Van Dijk's usually smiling and carefree face turned sour immediately. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked, anger boiling up clearly in his voice. "Aren't you also surprised? It's a skeleton that's acting as a student. Regardless, I want your help with something," she said. Ludwig immediately did the "I didn't say anything" motion by raising both hands in surrender. This made Van Dijk understand that she has yet to correlate Van Dijk to the skeleton. "What is it that you need?" Van Dijk asked. "I want to know if it's possible to increase a skeleton's flexibility and strength, even if they don't have muscles. I'm not that great when it comes to undead physiology, so you should know more," she said. "Well, they simply need to train and kill," Van Dijk shrugged. As if it was the simplest and most obvious answer in the world. The moment Van Dijk mentioned killing, a notification appeared in front of Ludwig, which he immediately willed to go away. The conversation in front of him was too important for him to be distracted for now. "Kill? And train? How can they gain strength when they're merely bones?" she asked. "An undead is powered by the power of the death god. Them training allows the blessing of undeath to permeate their bodies better, but it's killing that gives them true power. As a reward for sending one more soul to the god of death, they'll gain a small, almost negligible portion of the sent soul onto them. That's how you can artificially create a death knight. In theory, that is, if it kills enough living beings, they'll grow stronger and stronger, Van Dijk explained. I don't have anything for it to kill, Joanna said. Don't even bother. Killing would take it a few centuries to gain any significant power. It's a low-ranking skeleton after all, and it would probably die the moment it encounters anything strong. But training him would do wonders. It's the best option you have if you want to allow more of the death god's powers to permeate his body. Though it is extremely limited, he said. How limited? She asked. Let's see, a skeleton would probably gain about 3 times the power of an adult male. But they'll grow no more afterward because they'll need to start killing to gain more power, he explained. For a moment Van Dijk quieted and then asked, Why are you asking all these questions, Joanna? Also, why does he have a sword in his hand when he's wearing a mage uniform? Van Dijk asked. Oh, you won't believe this. He actually perfectly copied the Imperial sword style's first stance and move. Do you know how impressive that is? Oh, believe me, I know, Van Dijk said, almost remembering terrible days. He sighed once more and said, Ludwig. Yes, master, Ludwig replied, and this made Joanna's eyes widen some more. Do whatever you want, as long as you don't expose yourself to your peers, and make sure to keep up with your studies. I'll talk to you later about all this swordsmanship thing, he said and cut the call. The swordswoman turned to Ludwig. So, you're that despicable man's property, she asked. Ludwig gulped down hard. Don't worry, she said. This is even better. Now I'm a 110% more interested in making you take the path of the sword just to spite him. Go again. This time follow my moves. Chapter 24 Forced Plot. 4 hours later. Impressive, Joanna said as she looked at Ludwig's performance. What do you mean, teacher? Ludwig said as he turned to her. Behind him lay the destroyed forms of the training dummies. To think that in merely 4 hours, you'd already master the full first set of the Imperial style. Although any other human would have been drowning in a pool of their own sweat and exhaustion, your stamina looks to be endless, she said. Ludwig didn't try and explain how as an undead, he had no sense of exhaustion. In fact, it was true that his stamina was endless. But the most impressive part is that you learned in 4 hours what would take others 4 months, she said as she looked out the window, though it's getting late. And I can't keep you company for long, I'll leave you with this, she said as she handed Ludwig a small booklet. You have received Imperial-style training manual. The book looked to be in a rugged state and worn out. This book should teach you all the forms and moves you need to do in order to master the Imperial style until the advanced stage, she said. Advanced? What stage am I at right now? Ludwig asked. Well, technically, without fighting experience you're barely at the beginner stage, but since you are able to use the forms of the first style, you're at the early stages of intermediate mastery, she said. Then what's above the advanced stage? Ludwig asked. Well, it's expert and master, but those are pretty hard to obtain. Usually that takes decades of hard work and not everyone can just get there even with hard work. Take me for example. It took me 110 years just to reach the master stage, she said. I see. I guess there aren't many that are stronger than you in terms of swordsmanship, Ludwig said. She smiled. Flattery won't get you anywhere. Though I am strong, I'm not the strongest, not by a long shot. There are many monsters in this world, kiddo. And you're just a little monster now. Grow stronger and show me what you can do, she said as she turned and left the room. Ludwig finally was able to have some time for himself, and only then did he have the opportunity to see the huge number of notifications that he kept delegating to see for later. The first one was the one he received when Van Dijk was talking to Joanna. Eternal Quest was the title of this notification. Ludwig frowned. He hadn't done anything that would warrant his Eternal Quest proccing a new stage. After all, he has yet to gain even a smidgen of true power to even be able to evade Van Dijk's control. He read through. Eternal Quest. New. Chain Quest. First part difficulty, F. You have figured out a part of the truth behind the power of undeath, but your understanding is severely lacking still. As a servant of Deus Necros, you now know that you can earn power by taking another's life. Your quest is as follows: in the next 6 hours, kill a human being. Failure to do so will result in your death. Completing this quest will grant you audience with the inevitable, and you'll gain the title Apostle of Death upon satisfying the conditions. Remaining time 116 minutes. What? Ludwig panicked. He didn't know that his life was on a timer, and now he barely had 2 hours left. But the quest details, to kill a human being, was that something he could do? Yet, surprisingly, Ludwig didn't feel anything. It was as if he had no emotion of humans, so it wasn't that difficult of a quest to accept. After all, he had no choice in the matter to agree upon it or no. His only regret is that he took too long to even notice the death timer. Yet, he thought once more, what could he have done anyway? He wouldn't have been allowed to leave the room until Joanna said so he was stuck here regardless. He took a quick glance at the rest of the notifications before he intended to leave the room, lest he'd find another impossible quest that he ignored. Ludwig had gained 3 more stamina and strength points, which converts to 6 more in strength. He also learned complete move set of the Imperial style, first stage. This wasn't a skill or a spell, but it was a style of fighting, which he could use in battle. The moves were wide and destructive and had little to no flaws. A good basic swordsmanship that could help anyone in perilous situations to escape death. And finally, the book. Though he wanted to read it right away, he literally didn't have the time to do so. Ludwig immediately left the small room to find that it was well into the afternoon. Most students were not present, and the school seemed awfully empty. Ludwig began to panic. He needed to complete his quest, but there didn't seem to be anything he could do right now to achieve completion. Time was ticking. Oh, look who is here. That backstabbing motherfucker. Ludwig turned to see a fireball being hurled his way. He barely had the time to both recognize and jump away from the incoming projectile which blasted the door of the room he was training at. Looking at his opponent, Ludwig realized that somehow, in this weird and strange world, the scenario that happened to him felt awfully too cliché. After all, he needed to kill someone, and the person that appeared in front of him was someone who Ludwig truly thought he was one of the people who deserved that fate. That's right, it was the blondie noble from yesterday. Now, this is what Ludwig would consider a forced plot material. After all, in all the stories he read, an author usually would throw someone like this guy for him to deal with, and be the first stepping stone. But stuff like that only happens in books of fiction. This was reality. So something more divine or sinister was at play here. Someone was moving the chess pieces, and both Ludwig and the blondie were pawns being used right now. Chapter 25 Heartless. Aren't you being a bit too cruel? Ludwig asked, keeping his tone steady. This is a school, after all. The blonde noble sneered, eyes alight with malice. Who cares if 1 or 2 commoners die? He shot back, flexing his fingers until flames blossomed in each hand, flaring like twin orbs of raw anger. Shit! Ludwig muttered, as both fireballs hurtled toward him. He lunged sideways, barely escaping their searing heat as they exploded against the wall behind him, blasting outwards in a flaming cone that left scorch marks across the stone. -8 HP. But instead of fear, Ludwig felt a strange calm settle over him. As an undead, he realized, fear was a sensation he no longer fully possessed. What did the dead have to fear if they'd already passed from life once? Taking a split second to think, he dismissed the idea of retreating back to the academy halls where he'd find safety from this reckless pyromaniac. The ticking death timer on his quest flashed in his mind. He had no intention of wasting an opportunity to complete his mission. Far ahead, a low wall marked the boundary of the training grounds, and beyond that stretched a dense forest that hugged the academy's outskirts. He had only seen the forest from afar, but he knew it was vast and unexplored, reaching toward the horizon. That would be the perfect place to make his move. A fiery burst whizzed past his head, the heat grazing him as he ducked. Damn it! He cursed. The noble had a longer range than Ludwig anticipated, and he would have to zigzag to avoid more attacks. As he glanced back, he decided to test his inspect ability. Ludwig's eyes lit up for a fraction of a second, revealing his assailant's status information. Status screen, Vondel Thomas. Level, 12. Health, 4320, 4320. Mana, 330, 600. Class, Mage Apprentice, Second Circle. Title, Low Noble. Level 12, Ludwig muttered under his breath. No way I can face him head-on. He's got way more stats than me. Reaching the low wall, he crouched and sprang forward, intending to jump just high enough to land on the other side. But with his improved strength, Ludwig soared 3 times higher than expected, sailing over the wall and crashing into the dense branches of a tree. 14 HP. Damn it! He cursed, picking himself up. Behind him, Vondel Thomas clambered over the wall, his face contorted in fury as he pulled himself up. You're not getting away, boy, he growled. Ludwig turned and darted deeper into the forest, his undead body moving effortlessly over the rough terrain. As he ran, he noticed something that might play to his advantage. The noble, huffing and puffing as he gave chase, was clearly not used to prolonged physical exertion. If Ludwig wanted, he could easily outrun him and disappear into the forest. But that wasn't his plan. He needed this spoiled noble to keep pursuing him. Ludwig ducked behind a large tree, glancing back to observe his opponent's movements. Thomas, exhausted and red-faced, stumbled to a stop, cursing under his breath. You coward! Running away, are you? He shouted, voice hoarse. I swear, if I see you back in the academy, I'll burn the skin off your bones. Turning, the noble began to stomp away, muttering a string of expletives. Ludwig grinned. No way was he letting his target escape now. Picking up a stone, he hurled it as hard as he could. The rock hit Thomas squarely in the back, and the noble collapsed onto his knees, cursing as he clutched his back. 81 HP. You little. Thomas's stream of curses was so extensive that it momentarily amused Ludwig, reminding him of the chaotic lobbies in the shooter games he used to play. For a noble, Thomas swore like a hardened sailor. Rage contorted his face as he scrambled to his feet, hurling fireballs erratically. Flames crackled and spread, singeing trees and bushes, filling the air with heat and the thick smell of smoke. Ludwig backed up as he noticed the smoke thickening. They weren't far from the academy grounds, and if any professors saw the rising plumes, they would surely investigate. Ludwig couldn't afford that kind of attention now. In his anger, Thomas seemed to forget the nature of fire and forest. Soon enough, the flames were catching faster than he could control. Ludwig watched from behind a nearby bush, noting that the noble's tantrum had created a deadly ring of fire around himself. As an undead, smoke has no effect on your body. The notification briefly flashed across Ludwig's vision, sparking an idea. While Thomas was oblivious, Ludwig quickly took a detour around the ring of flames and crouched in the shadows, eyeing his target. The smoke grew thicker, filling Thomas's lungs with each breath, and his fiery attacks became fewer and further between as he coughed and spluttered. At last, he realized the precarious situation he was in. His gaze darted around in panic, looking for an exit. He tried to turn back the way he'd come, where the flames hadn't yet reached. Perfect timing. Ludwig whispered a single word, exhaust. A faint, shadowy aura flickered around Thomas as the spell took hold. Exhaust has been applied by element of surprise. The noble's face went ashen, his eyes wide with shock as the energy drained from his body. He collapsed onto his knees, each breath a ragged wheeze as he struggled to rise. He crawled desperately toward the thinning line of flames, hoping for a way out, but his pace was agonizingly slow, and the fire was spreading faster than he could move. From the darkness, Ludwig stepped forward, a smoldering branch in hand. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the patch of ground just beyond Thomas, igniting the last safe area and cutting off the noble's escape. Please! Thomas cried, his voice a strained, fearful rasp. Help me! Ludwig gazed down at him, his face an unreadable mask. He felt no anger, no pity, only the same detached indifference that death itself might display to the living. He watched as the flames licked at Thomas's robes, catching on the fabric and spreading across his skin. The noble's screams filled the forest as the fire consumed him, his body thrashing as he tried and failed to escape the inferno. Soon, his voice faded, the crackling of flames overtaking the sound of his dying breaths. And then there was only silence. You have succeeded in achieving the condition required to meet with the inevitable. Do you wish to meet them now? Ludwig didn't respond immediately. The roaring flames were spreading further into the forest, certain to draw attention from teachers or students nearby. He turned from the grim scene, deciding it was best to put distance between himself and the fire. Heading deeper into the forest, he made his way along a roundabout path, careful to avoid doubling back the way he had come. The last thing he wanted was to encounter anyone who might ask too many questions. Before long, Ludwig heard the distant sounds of people shouting as they rushed toward the rising smoke. He nodded to himself. His decision to leave immediately had been a wise one. Chapter 26 Soul-Letting Lantern. You are invited to have a personal meeting with the inevitable. Ludwig sat in his small room, staring at the notification hovering in his vision. His thoughts were a whirlpool of confusion and uncertainty. Was he truly ready to face this meeting? A part of him already knew what awaited, who awaited, judging from the title alone. He sighed, steeling himself. I should meet this entity, he thought, his mind racing. And from the name, it's obvious who it is. After the chaos of earlier, Ludwig had slipped back into the academy and managed to blend in among the students who had gathered to watch the teachers extinguish the flames consuming part of the forest. He had purposefully made himself seen, bumping into a few classmates and joining the concerned crowd, a perfect alibi to avoid suspicion. Once the commotion had died down, he quietly retreated to his quarters. As he reached his room, he heard the panicked cries echoing down the hallways, signaling the discovery of Vondel Thomas's charred corpse. Ludwig paid it no mind, locking his door and sinking onto his bed. The notification was still there, as clear as ever. With a deep breath, Ludwig selected the option to accept. For a moment, nothing happened, and he wondered if he had made a mistake. Then, his vision blurred, the world around him spinning before plunging into pitch-black darkness. It felt as if he were being pulled through a void, and when he came to, he found himself standing in an expansive, shadowy realm. Before him loomed a colossal entity, seated upon a throne carved from ancient stone and bone. This being was skeletal, its bones a pitch-black hue, as if darkness itself had fused with the marrow. Gold and jewels adorned its form, shimmering grotesquely, and a crown of bones sat atop its bald skull, simple yet undeniably majestic. The throne it occupied was studded with countless skulls, the eerie mementos of innumerable deaths. Behind the throne, an intricate network of shimmering, liquid blue streams flowed endlessly, forming rivers of spectral energy. Souls, shaped as skulls from every species imaginable, drifted within these rivulets, an eternal procession of the dead. Ludwig's eyes widened as he recognized creatures both familiar and fantastical, the sheer variety suggesting a dominion over all living beings. Above the entity, a massive scythe rested on one shoulder. Though its blade appeared simple, like a farmer's tool for cutting grass, its presence radiated pure menace. Ludwig instinctively understood that even getting close to that scythe would mean certain death. He gulped, feeling small, insignificant. The entity's eye sockets blazed with twin blue flames, as bright as the stars on a clear night. They fixed on Ludwig, as if looking straight through his essence. If Ludwig could put into words the being's presence, there would be only one: death. Ludwig whispered, the name escaping his lips involuntarily. It is indeed so, one who has died before, came the voice, a deep resonance that emanated from every direction at once. The entity's skeletal mouth remained motionless, but Ludwig felt the words vibrating through his very soul. Wait, body? Ludwig looked down, surprised. His hands, his torso. This wasn't the slime-like shell he had become used to. This was his old human form. It felt familiar, real. This is a place for the soul and the mind, Death explained, and that is how you perceive yourself within your mind. Thus, it is how you appear here. Deus Necros, Ludwig said, naming the god he knew was behind his resurrection. The skeletal figure inclined its head slightly. I go by many names, and that is one of them. But I prefer the one you spoke first, for I am death. Ludwig was stunned, though he tried to keep his composure. It wasn't every day one spoke to a deity, let alone death itself. You have accepted our meeting, Death continued, and I shall announce the reason for your summoning. The twin blue flames in Death's eyes flickered. You wish to return to your world? Ludwig hesitated, considering the question. Would returning change anything? He asked. My parents are already gone. Death seemed to regard him thoughtfully. Curious. Many have come before you, each one desperate to return to their world. It was their most cherished wish, even though none have ever succeeded. Yet you seem uninterested in your past life. Returning wouldn't bring my parents back, Ludwig said flatly, his voice tinged with grief. I can bring them back, Death replied, an unsettling promise uttered with perfect clarity. Ludwig's eyes widened as he looked up at Death. He knew that such a being had no need for lies. As he had read somewhere before, the strong find deceit beneath them. Indeed, Death said, as if reading Ludwig's thoughts. Lies are tools for the weak. So speak, Ludwig Heart. Do you wish to return and have your parents back? To a time before your tragedy occurred. Ludwig's heart, or the memory of one, ached at the thought. Of course, I'd want that, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Death's skeletal form seemed to shift, a faint aura of power crackling around the throne. Then so be it, Death intoned. Under my name, you will return, if you achieve a goal of mine. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Eternal Quest Update. You have succeeded in completing the first stage of the Eternal Quest, Meeting. Your reward for completing a meeting with the inevitable. Title, Apostle of Death. Your next mission is, hunt the 7 usurpers who have escaped death. Time limit, infinite. Reward, return to your original world, 1 day before your original death. Quest difficulty, impossible. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Ludwig's jaw dropped as he read the notification. The quest details were sparse, and he couldn't make sense of what 7 usurpers even meant. Before he could ask, Death raised one massive skeletal hand and plucked a skull from the throne's armrest. With a casual flick, the skull shrank and morphed into a thumb-sized lantern, which floated over and hooked itself onto Ludwig's waist. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. You have received a god-level item. Congratulations. For obtaining a god-tier item, you have earned the title. He who bears the power of the gods, plus 10 points in luck status. You now have a small chance to obtain double rewards from monster drops or receive a higher level item when crafting. Soul-letting lantern. Bound. Type. Cosmetic. The bearer can use souls in the lantern to empower themselves permanently. As long as at least one soul resides in the lantern, the bearer will return from death. Whenever a soul perishes by the direct or indirect involvement of the bearer, it will be absorbed into this lantern. Upon death, half of the souls in the lantern will be sent to Deus Necros, while the other half will be consumed to return the bearer to a point in time before their death, with the bearer retaining knowledge of the event. You shall always be perceived as alive by those who do not know of your death. You currently have 1 soul inside the soul-letting lantern. Ludwig glanced at the lantern, its dim light casting shadows on the floor. Inside, a familiar face pressed against the tinted glass, a tormented echo of von Del Thomas, the blonde noble Ludwig had killed. Find the 7 usurpers of life and collect their souls, Death commanded. Each time you claim one, I shall grant you what they held most dear. Now, go, apostle of mine, and show me how well you struggle. Ludwig swallowed hard, the weight of his new quest sinking in. There would be no turning back from this path. The flames in Death's eyes burned brighter, as if daring him to falter. And with that, Ludwig's vision went black once more, the ominous presence of death fading as he was pulled back to the mortal realm. Chapter 27 Purpose. Opening his eyes, Ludwig instantly looked to his side. The small lantern was there. It looked more like a keychain trinket, with small orange-tinted glass and metallic decorations all over it and a small skull here and there around it. And the person inside it was banging on the glass, soundlessly no matter how loud he screamed. Ludwig stared at him with dead eyes. "You get what you deserve," he said and simply ignored the lantern. "Now, things have changed a bit," Ludwig said to himself as he stared at a notification that popped up in front of him. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Due to your binding with the soul-letting lantern, you can no longer gain experience from slaying monsters or humans. All your quest rewards from here onward will change from EXP to their equivalent in souls. You can level up your stats using only the souls inside your lantern. Each time you level up your stats, using the soul-letting lantern, a total of 10 times, you will gain 1 character level. You can still gain stats doing quests or claiming achievements and they will not count toward your total level. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Ludwig was surprised to see the changes. They weren't little or few, and they were impactful to his future. Nothing changed in a general sense, but a lot had changed. I still need to fight and kill monsters to gain souls to level up, but only this time I have the ability to choose when to level up. This could come in handy. Ludwig thought. He'd read many times about how main characters chose to save their points they earned to level up in bulk when they're in a pinch and surprise their opponent. Which is frankly not the worst thing to do. After all, he needed to stay low-key. The protruding nail tends to get hammered in first. The next notification showed him a hint for his next ordeal. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. You have happened upon knowledge of one of the 7 usurpers. Personal bestiary has been unlocked and updated. Mordzander, usurper of life. The wrathful death. The world of Echoes had known the entity to be a guardian. While in reality, he has never guarded anything but his immortal body. Mordzander is a being who usurped life, refusing to return to eternal silence. Further information is unavailable. Location, last seen 200 years ago, at the northern peaks of Selenia, the land of decay. Appearance, unregistered. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Quest update. Visit the northern peaks of Selenia and slay Mordzander. Quest difficulty. Skull and crossbones, skull and crossbones, skull and crossbones, skull and crossbones, skull and crossbones. Addendum. Currently your level and experience in the world is severely lacking to fight against Mordzander. You should level up more and gain more experience before you try and face him. Time limit. Reward. Mace of Wrathful Death. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Ludwig tried to inspect the reward, as it looked like something of value. After all, it had a similar name to the title of the usurper Mordzander. But nothing came up after he tried. He sighed. Looking at the quest's difficulty and the hint given, he knew he had no shot at fighting anything considered a guardian and had lived for centuries. It finally dawned on Ludwig why his quests had an infinite time limit. Because they were quests he wasn't going to clear anytime soon. The final window popped up in front of him and he read. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Currently, your soul-letting lantern is hosting a single soul. Do you wish to use it to improve your stats? Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Ludwig immediately refused. It was only 1 soul, and it was all he had. If he were to use it to gain stats or any of the sorts, it would leave his lantern empty and that makes him mortal. He thought deeply about the challenges ahead, and realized that he had a lot of potential to do many insane and crazy things. But all is in vain without proper preparation, education, and knowledge. So for now, he pulled open his inventory and pulled out a few of Van Dijk's books. He needed to learn more about this world. He happened upon knowledge of one of the 7 usurpers by simply reading. Who was the author? Ah yes, Chilkra Algard, Ludwig muttered. And he had one more book from that author in his collection. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Somewhere far away from the control of the 5 towers of magic and the empire of Lufondel. Far too deep in the ground and hidden away from the sight of all living things and even the gods themselves. A massive room was currently hosting a meeting where no one was present in person. The room had been branded in an immense number of sigils and magical writings glowing intensely against the dark atmosphere of this hidden chamber. The table had 10 chairs, and some of the chairs had a person's hologram seated on it. A couple were, however, empty. Each holographic image depicted a different build of a different person. Some were gigantic, some were short, and some were human-built, and some were actually not human whatsoever and would be more akin to call them a monster with sentience. Yet their appearance were all shrouded. The only thing they all had in common was an item hanging on their waist. A soul-letting lantern. Chapter 28. The plot thickens. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a few flickering candles around the table. Shadows stretched across the stone walls, contorting the figures of the people seated around it into strange, monstrous shapes. A heavy air of foreboding filled the space, as if the very walls whispered of long-forgotten secrets and forbidden plans. "So, what are we thinking?" A gruff voice broke the silence. The speaker's hulking form loomed in the shadows, his features obscured, but his unnatural size and distorted limbs gave away the fact that he was no human. He was something more, something monstrous. A hiss of annoyance came from another figure seated at the table. The voice was cold, clipped. "Isn't it obvious? The boy has a new lantern, and unlike us, he hasn't been punished. He can still return from death. We can't let that happen. We need to capture him, confiscate all the souls he's collected, and then eliminate him." The voice dripped with finality, the weight of it hanging in the air. Another figure, whose face was obscured by a deep hood, leaned forward, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Isn't that a bit aggressive? I thought we were more about invite first, kill if they refuse than straight-up stealing their souls." A low chuckle rumbled in the room, a sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "We can't afford to take that kind of risk," the first voice snapped. "Whenever a new apostle appears, they bring a host of problems. They always think they're some kind of righteous hero, out to destroy the 7 usurpers. We cannot allow another fool to disrupt the balance we've worked so hard to maintain. We need the 7 usurpers alive so we too can remain immortal. If any fool tries to disturb that, we're done for." A second voice, this one more detached, added, "Indeed, though we cannot return from death like the new apostle, we must not let him hunt the usurpers, otherwise we'll lose our immortality." There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of breathing. A faint echo of ancient, gnawing hunger seemed to hang over the room, as if the shadows themselves were waiting for something to break. "We're not immortal," another voice muttered. "Not really. We can die, if we're killed." A murmur of frustration rippled through the table. "Don't be naive," the first speaker growled. "We're no longer bound by time. We don't age. We don't get sick. And most of us, we've grown far stronger than we ever were before the lanterns. There's no way I'm risking all of that for some self-righteous brat with a hero spirit and no idea what he's up against." There was a brief moment of silence as everyone at the table processed the grim reality. Then, one voice, rough and jagged like the scraping of metal, spoke again. "All right, then. What's the plan? We can't just march up to Black Tower Academy and hope for the best. They've got the 8-circle mage Dean protecting the place and that psychopath Van Dijk. And you," he turned to one of the figures, who winced. "You really had to anger him by slaughtering both his wife and daughter, didn't you?" The accused figure's eyes glinted in the dim light, but he remained silent. The others exchanged knowing looks, but no one dared challenge him. "Shut it," he muttered after a moment. "I didn't know who they were. It was a feeding frenzy. But Van Dijk? He's too preoccupied with killing my sired offspring, so he is rarely in the academy, nor do I think he'll ever care for the apostle. Soon enough, the apostle will graduate and leave the academy's walls. Then, his fair game." A faint chuckle came from another shadowed figure. "You really think we can just wait around for that? Another 3 or 4 years?" The tone was mocking, but there was a nervous edge to it. "We have no idea how powerful he'll be by then." The first speaker leaned back in his seat, his massive form creaking. "Patience is the key. We'll let the seer keep an eye on the boy. We don't need to rush. We've waited this long. A few more years won't make a difference." Another voice spoke up, calmer this time. "Just make sure we don't overstep. If Necros realizes we're spying on his apostle, he'll sever our connection. We've been cut off before." A ripple of unease passed through the group at the mention of Necros, but the first figure dismissed it with a flick of his hand. We're in no danger. As long as the seer does his job and stays hidden, we're fine. Speaking of danger, a voice chimed in. There's a 7 usurper near the academy. The gluttonous death. Any chance we can push him or egg him on to go to the academy? He can definitely deal with this apostle. After all, they hate us with enthusiasm. The room fell silent for a moment as the implications of that question settled over the group. After a long pause, a gruff laugh filled the air. Are you mad? The first voice responded, low and menacing. None of us here could stand against one of the 7 usurper, not even close. You wouldn't find me anywhere near any of them. Though the gluttonous death could be useful. He absorbs souls, remember? If he comes across the apostle, he'll take care of things for us. We won't even need to move a muscle, so instead of us egging the gluttonous death, we'll just have to hope that the apostle mistakenly moves toward it. Other than that, I wouldn't even humor the idea of getting anywhere near it. A murmur of agreement passed between the figures, and the mood in the room lightened for a moment. But the first speaker's voice soon cut through the growing sense of complacency. Then we have nothing to fear. On a different note, I've heard news from the imperial capital. They've chosen a new hero. What should we do about that? A tense silence followed, as each figure at the table considered the implications of a new hero entering the world. Nothing, the first voice said, finally. We are neutral. Heroes don't owe us anything, they don't hunt us, nor should they bother with us. Let's see what this one can do. But keep your eyes open. A chorus of agreement filled the room. For eternity. For eternity. Chapter 29 Accusation. Ludwig sat in the dim light of his room, surrounded by the ancient tomes he had managed to obtain from Van Dijk's library. The words on the pages were familiar now, but one name seemed to stand out among the rest, Chilcra Algard. The author's name was scrawled on nearly every cover, and Ludwig couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward it. I should look him up more, he muttered to himself, flipping through the pages. The dates were odd, many of them spanning centuries, and yet, they all seemed to align with a singular purpose, as if this writer had been crafting his legacy for lifetimes. That's old, Ludwig thought, tracing his fingers over the worn edges of a particular book. When the last rays of daylight finally faded, Ludwig stood, stretching his limbs. His training in imperial swordsmanship had become second nature. He moved through the drills with a fluidity that spoke of both his undead nature and the discipline he had forced upon himself. He would not allow his status as an undead to define his limits. Hours went by as he trained. Your imperial swordsmanship proficiency has increased. With a sigh, he dropped the wooden sword, satisfied with his progress. If he was a normal human being, usually that would be where he would rest, but since he is an undead, he continued reminiscing about the battle he had with Thomas. He knew that he did good, and also knew that although he had killed a person, he didn't feel much. Nothing in fact, it felt almost natural to him, as if he was eating chicken. A predator feels no remorse feasting upon prey. And as an undead, their enemy is all that breathes life. A knock echoed from the door, dragging Ludwig from his musings. He straightened, his hand immediately reaching for the hilt of his wooden sword. He didn't need to be told twice that this could be trouble. After all, he had no friends in this academy. So who would come knocking? Who is it? Ludwig called. It's me. Ludwig scowled. What kind of answer is that? Do I know you? There was a pause, then a hesitant voice. No, but I know you. You're the one who killed Thomas. Ludwig's blood, if he had any, ran cold. He yanked open the door, his hand grasping the intruder's collar before he even saw who it was. The young man stood before him, looking terrified, his robes marking him as one of the academy's mags. W8. Please, the young man stammered, eyes wide with fear. Ludwig's gaze bore into him, searching for any hint of a threat. The recognition hit Ludwig like a bolt of lightning. This was the same mage who had been tossed aside like a ragdoll when Ludwig first entered the academy. You! Ludwig growled, his voice low, threatening. What do you want? Ludwig used. Inspect. Status screen. Name, Hoyo Drak. Title, Fallen Noble. Level, 15. HP, 1500. Currently under the status effect, grafted. Grafted. Ludwig muttered, and that immediately caused Hoyo's face to turn white from fear. How did you know? He uttered, completely petrified. This was something that seemed to be a secret. I think Ludwig's mind began turning. Seems like you also hold a secret, and you still want to threaten me. Ludwig said. I'm not here to threaten you, the mage said, fear evident in every syllable. I'm here to thank you. Ludwig's grip tightened instinctively, his eyes narrowing. Thank me? For what? Killing Thomas. The mage swallowed hard, trembling under Ludwig's intense gaze. Yes, for that. Thomas was a monster, a noble who used his position to bully and torment people. He thought he could do whatever the hell he wanted just because of his family's name. Ludwig's grip on the mage's collar didn't loosen. His voice was a low, dangerous growl. And what makes you think I give a damn about your problems with him? The mage's face paled, but he held his ground, desperation in his eyes. Listen, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not here to blackmail you, if that's what you think. If I wanted you in trouble, I'd have gone straight to the dean the moment I found out. Hell, I wouldn't be here risking my neck if I wanted you dead. Ludwig's eyes narrowed further. Then what are you doing here? The mage exhaled shakily, trying to calm himself. Look, Thomas made my life, and the lives of a lot of other people here, a living nightmare. He'd target commoners, fallen nobles, anyone he thought was beneath him, and he always got away with it. Everyone knew, but no one did a damn thing about it because of his family's influence. So yeah, when I saw what happened to him, that someone finally stopped him. He paused, taking in Ludwig's cold expression. I'm here to thank you because that bastard finally got what he deserved. Ludwig's gaze remained hard, unreadable, as he considered the mage's words. Finally, he let go of the boy's collar, shoving him back just enough to create a small space between them. Did you tell anyone about this before coming here? Ludwig asked. No, I haven't told a soul. I swear upon the name of my house Drak. Then I might as well get rid of you now and there will be no more eyewitnesses. Hoyo raised his hands defensively as Ludwig's gaze hardened. No, please. Hear me out, he said, his voice urgent. He took a careful step back, putting a bit more space between them. Thomas had an older brother. He's a third-year student and likely this year's valedictorian. Compared to him, Thomas was absolute trash. But his brother doted on him, and now that Thomas is dead, you can bet there's going to be an investigation. They'll stop at nothing to figure out who killed him. You should lay low. Ludwig's expression turned dark, a sinister smirk creeping onto his face. This only furthers my need to eliminate you. Otherwise, who else would know that I was involved? Hoyo's face went pale, and he stumbled back, his eyes wide with fear. No, he gulped, trying to keep his voice steady. If you kill me, it'll only make things worse. It'll point all suspicion your way. You don't understand. Everyone knows about Thomas's bullying. I was his last target before you, but I was in the infirmary until tonight. I only happened to witness him chasing after you from the Clink's window since it oversees the training ground and the forest. So, I can account for my whereabouts. But you were alone with him on the training grounds near his death location. And they found traces that the corpse was afflicted with a exhaust shortly before death. And words already spreading that you used exhaust on him yesterday. The two who followed Thomas had spread it. Ludwig clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. Fuck. Hoyo nodded grimly. Exactly. If you don't tread carefully, you're the prime suspect. They're not going to let this go. I'd seriously consider getting the hell out of here while you still can. Before Ludwig could reply, a loud, thunderous voice echoed through the night outside the dormitory, its volume sending a ripple through the walls. Ludwig Heart, get the fuck down here. Since you're an undead, You resisted the fear effect. Chapter 30 Alibi. Ludwig's mind was immediately set aflame thinking of what he should do. First things first. You, fuck off, go up to the upper floor. If they see you here with me, we're both dead, Ludwig said. He had to remove all and any association he has with Hoyo. They'll both become suspects. So far nothing is concrete, and it all depends on how Ludwig acts from here onwards. Hoyo agreed wholeheartedly, especially since the loud shouts and threats to exterminate Ludwig's entire family were getting closer to his floor. Hoyo dipped out to the upper floor, leaving Ludwig by himself. He left the door open and walked out to the hallway, thinking up what to say or do. Suddenly a young man took a step onto the floor where Ludwig's room was at. The few students that came out to see what was going on immediately closed their doors after seeing who it was. A man of great height stood forward, green of eyes and blonde of hair, and with a muscular yet not overly inflated build. He fitted perfectly in an almost military-like set of clothes, but they all had the symbols and patterns of the Black Tower Academy. He had a sword drawn and he was out for blood. "You fucker," the man said, and simply flew right at Ludwig in a single step. Grabbing Ludwig by the scruff of his robes and pinning him to the wall, both feet several dozen centimeters higher than the wooden floor. "You entered battle. You cannot survive this fight. Hold on, man. What the fuck is going on?" Ludwig cursed, feigning ignorance. Thanks to his calmer presence of mind for being an undead, he wasn't flustered in faking his panic, and due to that, he earned a few seconds before the man in front of him outright killed him. "What do you mean, what's going on?" The young man roared as he threw Ludwig against the floor, making him tumble several times until he smashed into a nearby wall. 26 HP. Ludwig groaned and fake coughs, but the pain was real. That blow broke some of his ribs. "What the hell are you doing? Who the hell are you? Why are you doing this?" Ludwig shouted, hoping that anyone could interfere, or at least if a teacher were to come here things would change. "I'll end your life right here. This is for my younger brother, you murderer," he said as mana began gathering around his body and a strange force that isn't mana seemed to gather around his drawn sword. Ludwig read about that. That's aura, something that only warriors and knights can learn. This guy was a sword master. Ludwig knew well by the time any teacher were to intervene he'll be a cold dead corpse. Well, he's an undead, so that's already something that's actual. But he can't be dying right here right now. Ludwig immediately rolled aside and bolted down the stairs. He wasn't going to outrun a swordmaster, not with his shitty stats, but thanks to the stairs and the panic-ridden actions of Ludwig, he managed to stumble and fall right as a sword swing flew where his head was a moment ago. Ludwig continued rushing down the stairs, being followed by a fumingly enraged man with a sword. He thought about what he could do. Using exhaust on that person is basically asking to die. Not only is he not in a situation where Ludwig can ambush him to use it and cause it to deplete a lot of his stamina, but even if Ludwig managed to do so, at 10% that young man can still kill Ludwig 10 times over. And using exhaust would simply just piss him off further, confirming that it was Ludwig who killed his brother. As for other spells and abilities, none of them were of any use. The Imperial swordsmanship was too crude and too novice to deal with that person. Not to mention the difference in understanding. Ludwig would basically be a toddler swinging a toothpick for a sword compared to the man running after him. So, the only option he had was to simply run and buy as much time for himself as possible. He went down several flights of stairs before he bolted out of the dorm. Only then did the young man catch up to Ludwig, kicking him in the back. 40 HP. "You are in critical condition." "I fucking know that." And Ludwig wasn't talking about his low HP. Though the sky had no moon in sight, the dorm had several magic-operated lanterns outside, showing the two of them in the opening outside it. Several students peered out of their windows to see what was going on. Damn these bastards. They'd rather watch than help. Reminds me of the people from my world who used to film and record everything instead of calling help. Also, why the hell am I thinking of this when this sword maniac is about to kill me? Shit. Ludwig cursed more and more as he turned his body and backed away by pushing himself using his hands backward on the ground. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Ludwig shouted. "Why are you doing this? What did I ever do to you?" Ludwig needed to keep his act together, and if worse come to worst, Ludwig still has one soul that will bring him back one day earlier. The young man didn't speak as he swung down on Ludwig's face. Shit. Here we go again. Fakery of death is strengthened. Yet, the death notification didn't rise up. Instead, a man draped in black robes and had a wide smile on his face appeared right in front of the two. His mana-coated hand simply grabbed the sword by 2 fingers as he fixed his sunglasses. What is going on in here? It was Van Dijk, a ray of hope. Though Ludwig wanted to comment on why Van Dijk was wearing sunglasses when it was night time, he refrained from doing so. Why are you stopping me? Teacher, the sword master shouted. Well, you're trying to kill a pupil of mine. Should I not stop you? That response from Van Dijk made it clear that he had both identified Ludwig as a pupil, and as someone who was not going to die tonight. Or so Ludwig hoped. Regardless, Ludwig took on the hint and shouted, Master, this psychopath is trying to kill me. The moment Ludwig confirmed the disciple-master relationship, the young man's face turned red in rage. He knew his goal for the night would be foiled. All things must have a reason. Why is he trying to kill you? Van Dijk asked. I have no idea. I said. He killed my brother, the young man shouted. Without skipping a beat, Van Dijk tilted his head saying, You're Thomas Vondel's brother. He died earlier today, but that is strange. How did you come to the assumption that it was my disciple? Van Dijk asked. Because the teacher who did the autopsy on my brother's burning corpse said that he was afflicted with exhaust before he died. And I have witnesses saying that this guy used exhausted yesterday on my brother. Are you really serious? You think that that is enough proof to try and commit broad day murder? Van Dijk's tone became more serious. It's night time, master. Not that I'll say that out loud. But immediately several teachers appeared right next to us. Among them was the swordmaster teacher, Professor Odero, and even the old man from my first class who taught magic theory. They all came rushing in, some even still in their sleeping clothes. What's going on in here? They asked. But Van Dijk paid them no mind as he continued his conversation with the young man, not to mention that despite having no concrete evidence, not to mention he was with me most of the afternoon. Ludwig cursed inwardly, though that would be a great cover. But teacher Joanna was here and she already spoke to Van Dijk this morning, meaning that it's impossible for what he said to be true, since he was in a faraway location. Joanna had caught on immediately, and it was visible from her eyes. Before you say anything, Van Dijk said to Joanna, I have mastery of teleportation, remember? I believe I returned Ludwig around 3 in the afternoon. If I'm correct, that was exactly the time there was a fire going on. He even asked me if I could snuff it out. But seeing Odero going to the forest was enough for me to ignore it after placing Ludwig back in the academy's garden and me heading back to my tower. His words were final. It was all bullshit, lie upon lie, but mixed in with a few truths. Since I was actually in the garden among the students when the fire was aflame, and Professor Odero was there to shut down the flames. But how did he see all that? I'm sure he was far away, unless he had eyes here. Suspicious, Odero said. He did exit my class pretty early, so he should have had enough time. Which caused my heart to skip a beat, although I'm undead without a heart. You see, even teacher Odero agrees. He's a murderer. I didn't say I agree, the teacher scowled. It's just that he doesn't have an alibi between the time of death and him leaving my room. No, he did, teacher Joanna said. I was personally training him, not to mention several other students saw it. Joanna said. Just like that, everything seemed to be working out in Ludwig's favor, and the best thing he could do was stay quiet. A mage training in sword arts? Come on, teacher, just say you are covering for him, the young man said. Child, I'll only forgive it once because you lost your brother, and I understand your feelings, she said. If you dare insinuate that I'm being unjust or trying to cover up someone else, forget being a valedictorian. You'd be lucky to walk out of here with all your limbs. Her words were a threat imbued with an incredible amount of pressure, far greater than what the young man had on him. But, no buts, the kid is innocent. As a matter of fact, you're the aggressor in this situation. Though it is for a great sadness that your brother had died, you must remember, this is the Black Tower Academy. Deaths happen all the time. Van Dijk said, I'll be speaking with Vondel later. After all, you dared harm one of mine. I'll see to it that he pays me back for you breaking my property." And just like that, the young man's rage was immediately deflated and more confusion seemed to cloud his head. If Ludwig didn't kill his brother, then who had the balls to do it? "Ludwig, follow me. You'll spend the night in the Black Tower." For others this might sound like a move to protect Ludwig in case the young man were to have second thoughts. But Ludwig knew well that these words were not for his protection. He was about to get killed, or worse, scolded by Van Dijk.